Hey everybody, I'm Joe and we're talking about the Marvel Multiverse TTRPG as we often do, and today we're taking a look at 4, we could call them character building tips or hacks for building your character in Marvel Multiverse. So here we go. By the way, as we get rolling, as always, this game is in playtesting, and so if further rules updates come out that change some of these recommendations, or if there's a difference when the full rulebook is published this summer, I might have to do a video that updates for those changes. But as of update 1.3, these are 4 techniques that'll help you building your character. As we get rolling, it's important to note that we're not trying to hack the game in such a way as to break your narrator's game or to make something that doesn't fit inside of the world. These are rules as written techniques that can help bring the character you envision to life, but like with all things in tabletop RPGs, it's important to discuss your ideas with your narrator before the game gets going to make sure that it balances and fits within the game. So our first technique is going to be using the negative point modifier rule found on page 15 of the playtest rulebook, and using that alongside the SAD powers that are from Rules Update 1.3. Here's the way this works in practice. You have an ability score cap with your character. In other words, you are point buying your ability scores in this game, and you have a cap for the point buy you can do with any particular ability. And that cap is always 3 plus your rank. So at rank 1, you have an ability score cap for point buy that is a 4. This goes up to a 5 at rank 2, and so forth and so on. And you can get around the cap with certain powers, but that's not even what we're talking about. 5 points is not a lot to spend on your ability score point buy. How would you divvy those up? Well, you could just put a +1 into 5 of your 6 abilities, and this makes a little bit tougher of a character, but when you go to do the thing that you're supposed to be good at, it doesn't feel like you're really heroic, that you're doing things in a heroic way. It doesn't have a lot of punch to it. Okay, well you could take a +2 in that ability score, and then you would have 2 things that you are not adding point buy into, and that might feel appropriate. I think the most common way that people will build a character is 3 point buy inside of your primary ability score, and then a +1 in resilience to bump up your health, and a +1 to your vigilance in order to pump up your focus. And that's okay, but you have no significant defenses in your other attributes. So is there any way that you could either max out your point buy in your primary ability or add some defenses? And the answer is the negative point buy option. On page 15, it states that you can choose to have a negative point buy up to a -4 on any ability score and then spend those points elsewhere, making it very easy to max out your point buy in your primary stat and maybe have some extra resilience or have some extra focus. Now, how would you make up for this deficit? If you have a -4 in strength, let's say, then your defense against strength attacks or melee attacks is only going to be a 6, and that's not a lot. Fortunately, we have these SAD powers. I discussed these in my best powers in the game video, but they are the single attribute dependent powers, and they allow you to use the defense score from one ability as the defense score from another. So for instance, let's say you are a melee combatant, you've bumped up your melee capacity and you've dumped your agility. You could take the brawling power and now use your melee defense for all agility attacks. You still would not have an agile character, but you'd be a little bit more robust in your defenses. Our next technique is going to be the interaction of 2 rules that are found on back-to-back pages of the playtest rulebook. They are the power set and extra power rule found on page 60 and the surprising power trait found on page 59. Here's the way that they interact, and there's going to be a little bit of interpretation to the rule inside of this one, so it's definitely one to discuss with your narrator. On page 60, it tells us that at every rank that you achieve, you are able to take a new power set. But if you decide at a particular rank to not buy into a new power set, Instead, you can get an additional power. So with a level up in rank, you normally get 3 powers and a new power set, but if you forego the new power set, you can instead take 4 new powers. This is great in and of itself, and I think just about any character is going to do this at some point in his or her career. After all, you get 3 new powers per rank, and if you really buy in to 6 power sets all the way through your character's career at rank 6, then you've only ever dipped your toes into a wide variety of power sets instead of really going full into 1 or 2 of them. And I think the most interesting characters are going to be when you have a deep investment in 2, maybe 3 power sets. So at some point, you're going to want to forego a new power set and simply add a new power. I think a lot of people are going to do this, and it works in and of itself great. But now we're going to take a look at the surprising power trait found on page 59. The surprising power trait specifically says that your character can choose a power they would not normally be able to use. And here's where interpretation comes into play. How do you interpret wouldn't normally be able to use? Does that mean it has no requirements whatsoever, and you can at rank 2 choose a power that should be reserved for a rank 4 character? I don't necessarily think so. Does it mean you can bypass one aspect of a prerequisite? Or does it mean that you can choose a power that's in a power set you have not purchased into? This interaction is not specifically spelled out in the playtest rulebook or in the errata, and I would like some clarification from Marvel either in a rules update or in the core rulebook on exactly what this means. But I interpret it to mean that one part of a prerequisite can be disregarded. In other words, you could choose this power if you meet everything except for one prerequisite. You're off by 1 rank, or you don't have 1 power that's necessary, but you meet other requirements. Another interpretation would be that if you meet all other requirements, you could choose a power in a power set you have not purchased into. And by the reading of surprising power, that means you are not actually in that power set. So our interaction works like this. Let us say there is an entry-level power inside of a power set that you would love to grab. Perhaps it's the flexible bones power inside of the plasticity power set, but you don't want to purchase anything else into plasticity. So at 1 rank, you choose your trait being surprising power, and now you can choose the plasticity single power, flexible bones, as your 4th power, but you have not purchased into a new power set. Take your other powers instead of power sets that you are already a part of or utility powers, and you can have 4 powers at this level up. You can choose surprising power multiple times, giving you access to a pretty big variety of powers throughout the game. Is this a wise course of action? Not necessarily. Traits can be very powerful, and one day I'd really like to do a video on the best traits in the game, and they can give you a lot of other cool ways of customizing your character. So I would not always want to take surprising power, but it might be fun to do at some point in your character's career. Our next interaction is going to be multiple combat damage combined with combat trickery. Normally in the Marvel Multiverse game, you are making a single attack against a single target. There's not multi-attack in this game. You normally have to target 1 foe and you make 1 attack against them. And that's the nature of the way that combat works. But there are ways around this. There are ways to attack multiple targets. Sometimes this is with weapons like the submachine gun or the shotgun, which attack multiple targets. Or there are things like banging heads or whirling frenzy as powers, which allow you to attack multiple targets, sometimes up to every target within reach. Sometimes it specifies a number, but you can choose powers which allow for attacking multiple targets. When you attack multiple targets, you inherently are dealing less damage to them. Most of the time they are taking half damage on a successful attack, which means that your attack damage output is kept about the same. However, if you combine this with the combat trickery power, you get some really great effects. For those of you who haven't taken a look at this, combat trickery is now a power in the game. It used to be a trait. It was changed in the rules errata, and it allows for once per battle, after an attack is made, you get to turn the Marvel die over and simply decide that the attack is a fantastic roll. Now, this is going to pair with any effects that trigger on a fantastic roll. So for instance, the Whirling Frenzy power found on page 92 specifies that you attack multiple targets, they take half damage. On a fantastic roll, they take full damage and are knocked prone. So combine Whirling Frenzy with Combat Trickery, and you can walk into the middle of battle on the first round, attack everyone within reach, turn the Marvel die over, decide they take full damage, and knock them prone. It's an amazing way to start off combat and really begin the combat, setting your team up for success right away. Our last rules interaction for helping you take a character build in the direction that you want it to go is going to be to pay attention to damage multipliers. Now, I've got a video on how damage multiplication, damage reduction works, but essentially it modifies the Marvel die roll when you are calculating damage, and it can be modified with powers or with weapons. So you might want to choose the accuracy power, which adds a +1 to damage every time that you take it. And this works with all agility-based attacks. It's great, it's a very fun power, and it adds a lot of damage to your character's career. But what if you're building your character at rank 1 and you only have 3 powers to choose from, and you just don't have that resource of the power slot available for the accuracy power? Can you bump your power at early levels? And the answer is yes, and that's by taking a weapon. Things like the pistol or the knife automatically add a +1 damage multiplier. And so you can start with a weapon making agility-based attacks and have a +1 damage multiplier. At later levels, you can choose to take the accuracy power, and once you add it once, you now have a +1 damage multiplier, which is the same as the weapon, and nothing special happens. You still have a +1 to damage. But the second you take accuracy twice, and you get a +2, you've now bumped up to a +2 damage multiplier. And now, throughout your character's career, you've been able to bump your damage output consistently. All right, so this has been a look at 4 ways of maximizing your character build and being able to add some capacity to bring your character to life at the table. YouTube is literally made out of buttons. They're all over here. You know what to press, and thank you so much for your time and attention, and I look forward to seeing you next time. By the way, I do run a game of Marvel Multiverse over at startplaying.games, so if you are interested, I'll put a link in the description. Thanks a lot.